Welcome to the Duck Dive. We take the sources you send us, unpack the key insights, and basically give you that shortcut to staying informed.
Yeah, making sense of all the noise out there.
Exactly. And today we're digging into some pretty significant cybersecurity developments. We've got reports on malicious browser extensions.
Those are always relevant.
Right. And then big international law enforcement actions, cloud security issues, and this really novel campaign involving compromised edge devices.
It's quite the spread, actually. Covers everything from, user-level threats right up to these large-scale criminal ops and complex infrastructure attacks.
Our goal here is to help you connect those dots, understand what it means for you.
What is behind the headlines?
Precisely. And this deep dive is part of Security Sunday, brought to you by Sysnet Shield.
Ah, yes.
They're a cybersecurity company, and they specialize in penetration testing and red teaming.
Which ties in perfectly, actually.
Yeah. It does. Because those are the practices that explore exactly these kinds of vulnerabilities and attacker methods we're about to break down. Understanding the offense to build better defense.
You absolutely have to know how attackers think and operate. Can't defend what you don't understand.
Okay, so let's unpack this. First up, browser extensions. Something that affects, well, pretty much everyone. We've got sources talking about over 100 fake Chrome extensions doing some real damage.
Yeah, and the initial hook is so simple, isn't it? They pretend to be useful things, utilities, maybe VPN, finance tools, stuff people genuinely look for.
But that's just the disguise once they're installed.
Then the real purpose comes out.
Yeah.
And it's not good.
No kidding. Stealing logins, cookies, hijacking sessions, injecting ads, redirecting you, even messing with the pages you're seeing to phish you. How do they get that kind of power?
It really comes down to permissions. When you install an extension, it requests certain rights through its manifest.json file.
Okay.
These malicious ones. They ask for way too much, excessive permissions. And users often just click allow.
Giving them access to essentially every website you visit.
Pretty much. They can run code they pull from the internet, change what you see on the page.
Basically, free reign over your browser. And I saw they use some clever tricks to hide, too.
Yes, like using the onReset event handler. They'd inject temporary elements into a page and use that handler.
Why would they do that?
Well, it's likely a way to bypass content security policy, or CSP. Those rules are meant to stop this exact kind of script injection. It shows, a bit more technical know-how.
And they weren't just generic fakes, right? They impersonated actual services.
Right, like DeepSeek, Manus, Debank, even 40VPN and site stats.
Yeah.
That makes it much harder for someone to realize it's malicious.
So how are people getting tricked into installing these?
Various ways. Fake websites that looked official, search results, maybe even searching inside the Chrome store itself. And worryingly, a lot of the promo sites used Facebook tracking IDs.
Suggesting they were using meta platforms, like pages, groups, dads even.
It strongly suggests that, yeah.
Right.
Leveraging trusted platforms to push malware.
That's sneaky. And what was that about manipulating reviews?
Oh yeah, domain tools found that.
Yeah.
For the fake DeepSeek extensions, if you tried to give a low rating, it would redirect you to a private feedback form.
But high ratings.
Those went straight to the public Chrome web store review page. So they were actively curating a positive image.
Wow. Just wow. And even after Google took down the first wave, more popped up.
Over 40 more, according to LayerX.
Yeah.
Still available. It suggests a pretty large-scale operation, maybe even using AI to help generate them, given the similarities in structure and language.
That points to a bigger problem, and LayerX made a crucial point, right? Removing them from the store doesn't fix it for people who already installed them.
Exactly. It doesn't uninstall them from your browser. You, the user, have to go in and manually remove them.
Which is a huge risk for businesses. One employee gets tricked, and suddenly you could have a compromised machine, maybe network access.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It could lead to a serious breach. LayerX's advice for organizations is spot on. Actively check endpoints, remove these things, and set up proactive security rules, block extensions from unknown publishers or ones talking to suspicious domains.
Thinking about this from, say, Shield's perspective, this shows why pen testing isn't just about firewalls.
Right. You need to simulate these user-focused attacks. How could someone get compromised just by installing an extension? Testing those endpoint defenses is critical.
Okay, let's shift gears. From the user's browser to the bigger picture of cybercrime infrastructure. Operation Endgame.
Yeah, this is a big one, a major ongoing international law enforcement effort. They're specifically going after the ransomware supply chain.
And this latest phase in mid-May sounds like it hit hard.
It really did. The numbers are impressive. Nearly 300 servers taken down, 650 domains neutralized.
Plus a significant amount of crypto seized. What was it, 3.5 million just in this phase?
Yeah, bringing the total for the whole operation over 21 million. And importantly, international arrest warrants out for 20 key players.
What's really interesting is who they're targeting, not just the ransomware gangs themselves, right?
Exactly. They're hitting the initial access malware the tools used to get the first foothold, and crucially, the initial access brokers.
The middlemen who sell access.
Precisely. These are the specialists who breach networks and then sell that access on to others, including ransomware groups. By taking them out, they're disrupting the whole chain right at the start.
Trying to cut off the supply, not just clean up the mess. The sources mentioned specific malware families hit hard. Bumblebee, Quackbot.
Lactrodectus, Hijack Loader, Danabot, TrickBot, Warm Cookie. These are major players in that whole cybercrime as a service ecosystem.
So taking down their infrastructure makes it tougher for everyone using those services.
Definitely harder and more expensive for criminals to launch attacks. Disrupting that CASAS model is key.
The U.S. actions were significant, too, indicting individuals tied to Danabot and the alleged Quackbot leader. That Danabot capability list was interesting.
It really was. It started as maybe a banking Trojan, but evolved.
Yeah.
Full remote access, key logging, even video recording.
And used for cyber espionage against military and government targets.
Yeah, a specific version was. It just shows how these tools, initially maybe for financial crime, can easily be adapted for much more serious attacks.
Europol's director summed it up well, didn't she, Catherine DeBoll? Something about breaking the kill chain at the source.
By disrupting the services criminals rely on to deploy ransomware, we are breaking the kill chain at its source. That captures the strategy perfectly.
And it sounds like this focus isn't stopping. Europol's next big report is highlighting these initial access brokers.
That's right. It signals a continued push by law enforcement to target that early stage of the attack lifecycle.
From a red teaming angle, like what Sysnet Shield does, this is gold.
Absolutely. Knowing which access methods, which malware families are currently active and being targeted, helps you simulate the most realistic threats. It tells you where adversaries are focusing.
Right. Okay, let's move from tackling global crime rings to looking inward at potential weaknesses in our own infrastructure, specifically cloud security. Aqua found issues with default AWS roles.
Yes, and this is a really important finding about cloud environments. The core issue isn't malicious intent from AWS, but that some default identity and access management, or IAM, roles, or rules recommended in documentation, grant permissions that are just too broad.
So they give more access than strictly needed.
Exactly, which creates a big risk for privilege escalation and lateral movement if an attacker manages to get that initial foothold somewhere in the account.
Which AWS services were flagged?
Things like SageMaker for machine learning, Glue for data integration, EMR for big data processing, Lightsail for virtual servers, and also the open source Ray framework when used with AWS.
And the problem was often tied to one specific permission.
A major one flagged was Amazon S3 full access. Granting that by default to a service role means that service can potentially read from and write to any S3 bucket in the entire account.
That sounds really risky. How could an attacker actually use that?
Well, imagine they compromise something less critical, maybe an app running under one of these roles.
Okay.
They could then use those broad S3 permissions to, say, modify CloudFormation templates stored in S3, changing your infrastructure. Or they could inject malicious code into scripts used by Glue or EMR jobs, also stored in S3. They use that S3 access as a pivot point.
The source had a hypothetical scenario, right? Compromise an ML model in SageMaker.
Yeah, use its role's S3 access to backdoor a Glue job script.
Steal credentials, the glue job processes.
Escalate privileges, and then maybe modify those CloudFormation templates to gain persistent control or cause damage. It's a chain reaction, all stemming from that overly permissive initial role.
Makes sense. AWS has responded, though.
Yes, to their credit, they've adjusted the Amazon S3 full access policy for some defaults and updated docs, which is good.
And this isn't just an AWS thing. There was that Azure vulnerability Varonis found.
Right. In a utility called AZNFS mount, it allowed an attacker already on a Linux machine to escalate privileges to root.
And from there,
Potentially mount Azure storage containers they shouldn't access, install malware, move laterally within Azure.
that one was fixed in an update.
Yes, version 2.0.11. But both these cases hammer home the same point.
Sure.
Default roles, default configurations aren't always secure enough.
So the recommendation is clear.
Absolutely. Audit
Yeah.
your service roles, tighten those permissions, apply the principle of least privilege, only grant exactly what's needed, nothing more.
And again, for cloud pen testing or red teaming, this is bread and butter.
Totally. Finding and exploiting these kinds of misconfigurations, overly permissive defaults, is central to assessing real-world cloud security posture. You have to understand these cloud-specific attack paths.
Right now for something, well, completely different and honestly kind of fascinating and a bit disturbing. Vicious Strap.
Yeah, this was definitely out there. Attackers getting really creative. So Vicious Trap isn't just compromising edge devices, home routers, VPNs, DVRs, for the usual reasons like
What
botnets.
are they doing then?
They've compromised over 5,500 of these devices across dozens of countries and brands and turned them into a distributed honeypot network.
Wait, honeypots, as in deliberately attracting other attackers.
That seems to be the main goal, based on what Sequoia observed. They're hitting common devices using known flaws. Specific Cisco, D-Link, ASUS vulnerabilities were mentioned.
Okay, and how do they set up this honeypot? Their infection process, NetGhost, sounded pretty involved.
It is multiple stages. Exploit a vulnerability, download a script, use that to get a tool like our get, then exploit the same vulnerability again to run the main netghost script.
And then NetGhost cleans up after itself.
Exactly. It runs, does its job, and immediately removes itself to make detection harder.
So what does it do in that short time it's running?
This is the really clever part. It checks for common open web ports on the device, 80, 8000, 8080, if it finds one.
Yeah.
It uses IPTPL's rules, standard Linux firewall rules, to redirect all incoming traffic destined for that port.
Redirect it where? Not to the device itself.
No, redirects it to attacker-controlled interception servers, mostly located in Malaysia.
So if I scan one of these compromised routers on port 80, I think I'm talking to the router's web interface.
But you're actually talking to Vicious Trap server, transparently proxied through the compromised device.
Why? What's the point?
Intelligence gathering. By sitting in the middle and capturing that redirected traffic, they can see who else is trying to exploit these vulnerable devices.
They're watching other hackers.
Essentially, yes. They can collect exploits others are using, maybe even 0 days, and potentially they could even hijack the access that other attackers gain. Sequoia saw evidence they reused a web shell someone else had planted, which really supports this theory.
They're using compromised devices as observation posts to spy on the cybercrime world? That's
Yeah.
elaborate. How did Sequoia even figure this redirection was happening?
Through some clever network analysis, looking at things like shared SSL certificate fingerprints across suspected devices, and analyzing network packet details like the time to live, TTL, and TCP window size.
How does that help?
Those values often change in predictable ways when traffic takes an unexpected detour, like being redirected. It leaves digital breadcrumbs. That's how they identified over 5,300 unique compromised hosts across 84 countries.
Macau had the most, apparently. And there were clues about the attacker's origin. Chinese speaking, maybe?
Based on some weak overlaps with other tools and targeting patterns, yeah. Like avoiding redirection within China but focusing on traffic heading towards, say, Taiwan or the US.
It's just a really sophisticated intel-focused operation.
It absolutely is. And for red teamers like Sysnet Shield's teams, it's a wake-up call.
How so?
Compromised perimeter devices might not just be about command and control anymore. They could be used for surveillance, for intelligence gathering in these novel ways. You need to consider these less obvious tactics when simulating advanced threats.
Okay, let's try and pull these threads together. We've covered a lot of ground.
We really have. It's a wide spectrum, isn't it? You've got the social engineering and tech tricks in browser extensions hitting users directly.
Then the massive coordinated takedown of criminal infrastructure with Operation Endgame.
Persistent risks from just, default settings in complex cloud environments.
And finally, this genuinely surprising vicious strap tactic using compromised devices for intel gathering.
It just highlights how adaptable attackers are. They aren't sticking to one method. They find weak spots everywhere. Endpoints, networks, cloud config, even within the criminal ecosystem itself.
And they keep innovating, finding new ways to exploit them.
Which means understanding that whole picture, how they get in, how they move, the unexpected things they might do once they're in, is just crucial for building defenses that actually work. You need that full spectrum view.
So boiling it down, what are the key takeaways from this deep dive for you?
Well, first, be incredibly careful about browser extensions and permissions. Second, law enforcement is having an impact on cybercrime infrastructure, but the fight's far from over. Third, Cloud security demands attention beyond the default's configuration is key.
And for
And fourth, attackers are getting more creative and strategic, like vicious drap, using compromised devices for intelligence, not just immediate gain. It's a reminder that their goals are evolving too.
staying on top of all this diverse and changing threat landscape is just vital, whether for yourself or your organization.
Could agree more.
Absolutely. And it leaves you wondering, with attackers getting this creative, turning devices into spy networks, what other parts of our digital world might they be watching next, and why? Something to think about.
Definitely food for thought. And thanks for bringing these sources together for us to dig into.
Of course. And remember, this deep dive is part of Security Sunday, brought to you by Sysnet Shield. They specialize in penetration testing and red teaming, the kind of offensive security work that helps uncover these vulnerabilities and understand how attackers operate before they strike.